Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card is a DIY scratch off. I thought it'd be really fun to do this. You can do it with all different kinds of stamps. I chose the Mama Elephant Three Amigos, and I'm going to cover up the signs after I put the messages underneath. I'm going to start by stamping my images on a piece of Canson XL mixed media watercolor paper. It's a bright white thin paper, and I've cut it down to 4 inches by 5.5, and that way it gives me a little bit of a mat on the top and the bottom. I'm going to stamp all 3 of these in VersaFine black onyx ink. I've got the one without the tail in the middle, so I have tails on both sides. And once I'm done stamping all of these, I'm going to cover it with clear embossing powder, and then I'll heat it to set it. And the reason why I'm embossing this is because I am going to be watercoloring it, and I find that watercoloring is really much easier when you have an embossed image because it helps you stay in the lines with your painting. I usually heat the back of the paper when I'm done just a little bit because it helps unwarp it a little bit. All right, now I'm going to stamp my messages. I've got "You're awesome," "You're cute," and "What they said." I'm stamping it in Ranger Archival ink. I wanted it to be dark black, but I'm not going to emboss this because I need it to be completely flat. Now it's time for watercoloring. I'm not going to spend too much time with the watercolor because it is going to take a little bit of time to do the scratch offs. So I'm just going to take a Zig watercolor pen. This one is light brown, and I'm going to do my fox. What I'm doing is coloring all the shadow areas first with just a light coat of this pen. And then I'll take my aqua painter. It's the smaller aqua painter of the 2 that come in the Stampin' Up! Pack. And I've got quite a bit of water here, but I'm going to wipe it off on my tissue to make sure that I don't get an all over color that's all the same without my perspective of shadow. And I'm just going to move the color around. It loosens up very quickly as soon as you apply water, and it really doesn't matter if you wait a long time. You could take your time coloring. It'll blend out just fine. So for my fox, this is light brown, and then I'm going to take light gray because although these areas are white, I want to give a little bit of shadow. So I'm going to put a little bit of the light gray on either side of his face, and then a little bit on the tip of his tail, and then again I will take my aqua painter and just pull that color out. Not really all the way out because I do want to leave it white, but I want a little bit of gray in the corners just for some shadow. So do that same thing on the tail. For the next animal, the cat, I'm going to actually do 2 layers. The first one is oatmeal, and I'm just applying that all over the same way I did with the fox and blending it out with my aqua painter, and this is providing a base layer of color. I'm going to go back in with a darker color after this has had a chance to dry. So while that's drying, I'm going to work on my raccoon. I'm going to take that same light gray I worked on with the fox, and I'm going to apply some color to the areas and in the shadow areas, and then I'll blend that out. And the other parts of this raccoon are black, and as you know, the black Zig marker is extremely dark, so I usually put it on my craft mat and then I pick it up with my aqua painter so it's not quite so dark, so it gets a little bit diluted. So I'm going to do his eyes, and then I'm also going to do a little bit of the stripes on his tail. And actually, after I was done coloring all this with the black, you can see how I went in for more color. You can always start lighter and get darker, but I found that I added a little bit too much color. I just thought that the tail was a little bit too dark in those black areas. So what I did was I have 0 color on my brush. So I'm just having the aqua painter with just water, and I'm coloring it and I'm wiping it off on a tissue. And you can see it's definitely loosening up that color and pulling some of it out so that it's more of a dark gray than a black. And so I'm just going to continue doing this. You can see it's actually removing the color and take some of this color out. Plus I wanted it to match his eyes a little bit better. I thought the tail was just a little bit too dark compared to the eyes. And now that the cat has had a chance to dry, I'm going to go back in with a darker color. This is called mid brown, and I'm not going to put too much, just a tiny little bit on the edge to provide a little bit more shadow for this cat. I felt like the light brown, the oatmeal, was too close to the fox, and so I wanted to get a little bit more of the dark brown in here. And this brown is pretty darn dark. So as you know, these Zig markers can give you some pretty intense color, so you have to be kind of careful. So I'm just going to work this color out toward the middle, but it's nice that I have this base layer of the oatmeal to work with because now I don't feel like I have to pull that brown all the way to the center. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit and finish coloring this guy all over his body. And then I decided afterwards that I wanted it to be a little bit more brown. So I'm going to take my pen and just color. You can see I'm adding just a little bit of color with the pen and making it a little darker. So you can always go darker, but it's a little harder to pull the color out. The final step in coloring this is going to be giving these guys a place to stand, because they kind of look like they're floating until you do this. And I just took some of that black and put it on the craft mat, picked a little bit up with my aqua painter, and I just dabbed a little bit on the left corner so it looked like they were standing on something. Now it's time to provide the base for the scratch off. Now this is just some clear packing tape. And so what I found was the easiest thing to do was to use my stamp set as a guide for cutting this. This can be a little bit tedious to cut. The first thing you have to do is cut off that serrated edge. It's going to stick to your scissors. And the first time I actually created this card, I eyeballed it, and then I kind of trimmed it and trimmed it and trimmed it until I got it the size I wanted. But I found that you can actually put it on top of the stamp set and use this as a guide. It's not going to be exact, so you have to kind of fix it as you go, but it'll pull right off. So you can see after I did this last line here, because I just want to cover up the sign, I was able to just use my fingernails to kind of pick it up and pull it off, and it was just fine and it worked. Now I wasn't worried, at first I was worried about cutting around the hands so that the tape would not be on top of the paws, sorry, not hands. But I found that once the tape got down there, you could barely see it, and it was going to be a lot of tedious work to go around those paws. So I just made them perfectly square, and so the paws are half covered by the tape. So here you can see up close where it's shiny, that's where the tape is. So I'm just covering up the signs. Now I'm going to create the scratch off mixture. I've got a plate that I'm going to mix it on along with a palette knife. You'll need some dishwashing liquid, this is Dawn, and some acrylic paint. I have a big container of this Dick Blick acrylic paint, but any silver acrylic paint will work. It's 2 parts paint and 1 part dishwashing liquid. So I know you can't see me pump this on. This is actually from my kitchen. This is how I store my dishwashing liquid. But I'm just doing about 3 squirts, and you just have to eyeball it. It really doesn't need to be exact. But once you get this all on a plate that you can mix up, I'm just taking my palette knife and mixing it up and get a nice texture, kind of liquidy but thick so that it can be applied with a paintbrush. Before I actually put this on my project, I'm going to do a little test here. So I'm going to grab a piece of my tape and put it on a piece of scratch paper, and then I'm going to start putting some paint on it. And you just apply it with a paintbrush, and it won't damage the paintbrush at all. It washes off really easily. And for my test here, I'm going to put a very thick layer on. But for the actual project, you're actually going to be putting on a very, very thin layer, and you're going to put in lots of layers. So you can see here, I'm going to start dabbing it on there just to get a really thick layer, because this is just going to be a test. I just want to make sure that it's the right mixture so that it'll scratch off. Now I'm going to use a heat tool, but the acrylic paint will bubble up with a heat tool. So I'm going to be really careful. I'll show you later with the actual project, but I just want to make sure that this mixture is right. So I'm just trying to do it quickly. And when I scratch it off, you can see it scratches off perfectly. And actually it's better than a real scratch off because it pulls off kind of in a gooey piece and it doesn't shred everywhere. I'm going to start applying my layers, and you can see I'm applying a very thin layer. I want it to be nice and smooth. I don't want it to be clumpy or bumpy or anything like that. It's going to take some time. It's going to take a number of layers. So you just have to be a little bit patient, and you'll be able to put on thicker layers as you progress. So I'm going to finish up this first layer, and I've also got a square edge, like a rectangular edge brush, and that helps me get right into the corners of this sign. So I'm going to continue on and do these other 2 signs, and I am going to take a heat tool to kind of speed things up since I have to do so many layers. But you can see I'm kind of putting it on for just a few seconds and then taking it off, and because I have such a thin layer, it's okay, but watch for any bubbling that might occur. So now that it's dry, I'm going to apply layer number 2. And you can see that it'll start to stick a little bit better than the first layer did because you don't have that slick tape surface. And so as you progress, you'll be able to put thicker layers on because it will stick underneath. So here is layer number 2, and I'm going to show you all the different layers that I'm doing. It might also help to turn it upside down and pull the paint from the other side. All right, so here is the start of layer number 3. So you can see it's starting to look a little bit darker. And now here is the start of layer number 4. So you could still see those words underneath, but now I'm starting to put on a little bit more paint. Here's layer number 5. And it takes probably a couple of minutes to put the paint on and maybe like 30 seconds to dry it. So even though it is a lot of layers, it's not taking me that much time to do. All right, so here is layer number 6, and I probably could have stopped after layer number 6, but I decided, why not? Let's just do one more. So I put layer number 7. And by doing thin layers, you get a nice smooth surface for the scratch off. And so here's the finished scratch off, and you can't see through it at all. Now I know I put a lot of layers on, but I barely used any paint. So you can see I have almost all the paint left, so you really don't need much. My camera accidentally turned off. I'm not sure what happened here, but all I did was take a sponge dauber and some tumbled glass distress ink, and I'm just creating a little bit of color at the top, forming a sky for my 3 guys here. I did not have a scratch off stamp, so I just put this into Microsoft Word and put my Nina cardstock through my printer and printed it out and trimmed it. And what I'm going to do is turn this over and first adhere my panel with some ATG tape runner to my Hero Arts note card. Remember, I had cut this back earlier in the video so that I could have some matte at the top and the bottom. And then I'm going to take my scratch off piece and my penny, which I'm going to include with the card, and I'm going to mark to the left of the penny and to the right of the penny, and that's where I do not want to adhere it. So I leave a little bit of a pocket for the penny to go into. So I'm just going to sort of eyeball putting some tape runner on either side of these pencil marks, and then I'll adhere it to the front of the card. And after I did this, I realized that I should have adhered the bottom of the sentiment piece. See, I'm erasing my pencil marks here because the penny will fall through unless I have it secured at the bottom. So I just took a 2A glue pen and I put a little bit of adhesive just on the bottom edge to make sure that the penny wouldn't go through the bottom. And then I pressed that down into place, and I grabbed my scissors and I just trimmed off the excess on either side. And so I can put my nice shiny penny here in the pocket, and it'll hold into place, and it's ready to go. And that is the card for today. So something interesting and different and fun. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.